Afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kay Lazar. I'm a reporter at the Boston Globe, and I am delighted to be joined by our panelists today. Going down the panel here, Agefriendly, New York City Health Commissioner; Caitlin Coyle, Director for Social and Demographic Research on Aging at UMass Boston; Marisol Amaya, Executive Director of La Alianza Hispana, a community-based organization providing culturally and linguistically appropriate health and education programs to the Latino community of Greater Boston; and Andrew Scott, Professor of Economics at London Business School and author of The Longevity Imperative. Welcome. Thank you all for being here today. This event is part of the Dr. Lawrence H. and Roberta Cohn Forum Series. The studio thanks the Cohn family and welcomes them and all of our in-studio and online visitors today, guests today. Most of you in the studio today look to be in your 20s or 30s and can expect to live another half century, well into your old age. And probably a decade or two longer than your grandparents. But how will you live fulfilled and healthy? How do you do that? So let's start with a question for each of our panelists. So often people view aging as a bad thing. How can we change that? How do we change that thinking? What can we do? Let's go down the line for each one.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. It's great to be back at HSPH, my alma mater. Aging, I think Andrew talks about this in his book quite well. We are, for the first time in our lifetimes, expected to live longer, much, much longer than our previous generations and than our parents and grandparents. And so how we age and the structures we put into place to support healthy aging are really crucial. And I think from my perspective, in a big city, the biggest in the country, and in a government seat, it's really what are the things we do collectively, structurally, that we don't atomize the process of aging as an individual concern, as a set of actions that you just take on your own, but that we actually instantiate that in public health. And we look to prevention, we look to policy, we look to risk factor reduction, we look to supporting older adults with healthy social infrastructure, with social connection, with meaningful opportunities to remain in work should they choose, so that aging becomes a key principle of public health, which it increasingly is. And one example is simply in New York, our Agefriendly New York City task force, which the Public Health Department helps to convene with the Department of Aging. And at every turn, we are not just looking at the averted negative consequences of unhealthy aging, but we're looking at the aspirational, forward-looking indicators of healthy aging. And so I think that's quite an important, foundational touchstone for a conversation about aging in a school of public health.
Thank you. Caitlin.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. And I guess I'll speak a little bit. I spent a lot of my time in the community doing applied community-based research. And so my response on how we can sort of change the societal narrative around aging from negative to positive, I really think about it in terms of language and sort of how we talk about aging as a community, as a society, and really that those words matter, and how we talk about it is really powerful. And also that, I think one of the biggest perpetrators of ageism is against ourselves. We do a lot of internalized ageist, self-reflection and self-talk. So things like, oh, I'm feeling old today, or I can't do that, I'm too old for that, or I don't stay up late, I'm too old, this kind of thing. And so I really think if we can start to engage people in thinking about how they talk about aging outwardly, but also how they think about aging internally, we can really start to shift the societal narrative by tapping into individuals' perceptions.
Thank you.
Marisol. Thank you for being here, and I agree with you. One of the points is, since we are children, we have been always bombarded with the negative message that aging has to be the grumpy person complaining about pain, they what, I cannot hear, and things like that. But you never focus and think in the positive way that that person that is running the marathon a week ago, 75 years old, is running. The professor who is still teaching 19 years old. My father who is 19 and run every day 3 miles. So why you don't look at that role model and focus in the positive way that aging? Aging depends on you, how you see the other person and how you're going to project and going to take care of yourself and the early age time. So that depends on you. So focus and get a positive role model, focus to get also a positive person that always had an open mind. So and always never stop learning, because you can be 19 years old, but you can read a book and learn a lot from Professor here, Andrew, or something like that. So you can be always getting updated. So that is what I said.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's, I think, said the key things. We kind of got a bit messed up about aging. It's a complicated word, and I think, it's an irony that there's a lot more older people around now. We're much more likely to become old, and we become more negative about aging. That's a really bad combination. And I think it comes about because we started, particularly I think in Western Europe and America, to medicalize old age. And so we see old age only in terms of decline, ignoring the things that we know actually improve with age. And there's lots of things like life satisfaction we know tends to increase as you get older. So I think we're kind of very messed up, and that medicalization is part of it. How we change it is hard because my work focuses upon longevity and says, look, the trouble with aging, we tend to go straight to end of life. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't like to think of that. But a longer life is about having more future. And I think switching from an aging society where you focus on lots of people aged over 65 to saying, hey, it's a longevity society, we've got now the majority who will live to be over 65. And how do you think about that and how do you prepare for it? I think we see aging as an event, 65-year-old. But it's kind of a process. And I think once you see it as a process, it then is relevant at all ages, and what can you do to manage that process, and how do you make sure you make the most of it?
Thank you. So often older people feel isolated without a sense of community. How do we go about building a better community, a more inclusive community? Caitlin.
Yeah, well, I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about the importance of community and this idea that older adults have a propensity to feeling isolated, because I think that's a really complicated and important topic. This idea that isolation is not an all or nothing situation. It's sort of a spectrum. It changes. People have periods of isolation. They have periods of reconnection over their life course. And we also all have individual sort of barometers for what our preferences are around social connection. So I often think about loneliness as this sort of equation of what my preferences are versus what I actually have in my life. And if those things are unequal, then tend to feel lonely. And I just think that speaks to the diversity of the experience of isolation and loneliness in older adulthood and really across the lifespan. And that means that our solutions or our development of community connections has to be equally as diverse, meaning there isn't a sort of one solution to isolation. It really has to be a community, a restructuring of community, which much of what we're talking about here today, but that includes things like the built environment, and it includes things like technology and family structure and thinking about that. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is people wanting to feel connected to something outside of themselves, whether that's their neighborhood, whether that's their faith community, whether that's their family, whatever it looks like. I think it's really how do we cultivate environments of all kinds that allow people to feel that way, to connect to something bigger than themselves. So I think that's really, and there's obviously a huge amount of research. The U.S. Surgeon General's report, in terms of the data and the research on the importance of social connection across the lifespan. And so I think, we could talk all day about the importance of community and all of the, we were talking earlier about experimentation, and a lot of it is going to be about trial and error and trying to figure out what fits for what people, because not one size will fit all.
Right. And earlier, before the event, we were talking about specific programs, and Marisol, I thought you have a few there.
Like I say, we are all humans, and humans always want to be connected with other people. It's part of our nature. So the thing is, if the programs or activities, they are not connected, the person, or they don't feel like they had a goal, or they don't feel connected with those activities, they are not going to be there. Like if I put a person who hate to play a bingo and a table at a bingo is not going to be really enjoyable. And we have to be that part. So at the Alianza, we focus a lot not only to offer a cultural, linguistic, appropriate services, because the majority of people that come in there are Latinos, but also seeing and listen to them and listen what is the preference, what they did in their life, what their hobbies they have it. And we had different activities running during the day. Some people love art. Some people just want to play bingo the whole day. Some people want to teach. We have people who has been in math, teaching professors of math, so they are teaching. So we really fill it out, those people with the hope of life. That is the most important, be able to feel it like they had a purpose for every day. They really wake up and going to get ready and beautiful. We had cases where the people were coming because she went through such a difficult time. Her son died, the daughter died, so many deaths in the family, all dressing in black, every day, depressed and sad. But when we put some purpose in life, and she's teaching how to color in and how to do things with a group of people, now she is full of color, like spring colors every day, but we fill it out the right part. So that is why programs has to be not just general for everybody. What we said, it has to be more personalized and give it a touch.
And Ashwin, I know you have some programs you'd like to talk about that you're trying in New York.
Yeah, you said the word correctly, isolation. Isolation as a public health issue. We know that isolation has measurable impacts on the body, on neurological development, on the immune system, on the development of cardiovascular disease, right? I think estimates around 15 cigarettes a day, the equivalent. I love that data point. I don't know how real it is, but it's a nice talking point. But it's a real thing, right? And so we take a lot of our inspiration in New York City around the concept of social infrastructure. How do you create the programs and the places where you can break isolation? And so for older adults in particular, that can be places of physical congregation, like our older adult centers, which we've invested in and expanded over the last several years, places that have a lot of the programming that Marisol is talking about, and that really try to meet people where they are and keep them coming back, keep them engaged. We have a lot of older adults in New York City who have a lot of material need, but material need meaning food and clothing and basic needs might be the way to get them in the door, but it may not be the thing that keeps them coming. It's going to be about relationships and activities. So that's one area of work. Another program that we are very proud of is a program called Be a Buddy, where we pair an older adult who's very isolated with a younger person to check in on them on a regular basis. And this was very much inspired by Eric Kleinenberg's work from the 1995 heat wave in Chicago, which systematically showed that older isolated adults were the ones who perished in that heat wave because no one was there to check on them and they had no one to call. So we set up these pairs, these dyads of young people and older adults to check in on a regular basis, which can then be activated in an emergency. And we found Be a Buddy to be quite important during COVID. Where we leverage that network to actually get older adults out to get vaccinated or to bring home-based vaccination into their apartments. And so these are the types of infrastructure that we need to build to break down the silos that we build up over time and that we build up between age cohorts as well.
That's a really great point, and the feeling of being interconnected between the generations. And how can we do more of that? You talk about it in the community and by government. Andrew, what about in corporate America and sort of economic kind of approach to it?
Yeah, I mean, the intergenerational issue I think is huge because, by nature humans are social beings, and there's a particular dividend, it seems, from intergenerational connectivity that works for both old and young. And for most of human history, when lives weren't long and we had lots of children over a long period of time, society was pretty intergenerational. The household had people of all generations. But as we're living longer, having fewer children, we've become less intergenerational. And then we designed institutions to encourage that, schooling, retirement. We've become very, very age segregated. And we've become very focused on chronological age. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges we've got, because that stops seeing people as people. And of course, on top of that, we've also got this dramatic change in the demographic structure. When I was young, I was brought up in London. Family parties, there were seemingly hundreds of cousins, dozens of aunts and uncles, and just a couple of grandparents. But now if you're in China or Japan, there's one grandchild, 2 parents, 4 grandparents. So we've got to rewire these institutions. It's very under-institutionalized. We've got to try and exploit it. And I think we need to see that in the firm, we need to see it in society, because particularly in America, where the demographic pyramid used to be lots of young and not many old, it's now a tower, now a column. And we've got to try and find ways to exploit that age diversity. And loads of evidence says diversity leads to better outcomes, particularly in the workplace. And it worries me, you see a lot of the sort of main dialogue about firms is about managing 7 generations in the workforce and how Gen X is different from baby boomers. And I think that's to segregate people in another way. We've got to think, how do we bring together more experienced workers and younger workers and find ways of benefiting, because there's loads of gains in terms of innovation happens in that way.
So how do we do that, Marisol? How do we teach a younger generation the value of an older generation and vice versa?
So it's very important for the younger generation to understand everything that the older ones can give you. They can give you wisdom, they can give you learning to take care of yourself, take care of your brain. Many times when you become older, you realize that you need to breathe. And many of you, youngest one, don't do it. So after a while, you just start to say, oh, I need to learn to mindfulness and breathe and do things. So I will say intergenerational activities given, not the intergenerational activity that many people think about. Oh, I'm going to take a group of high schooler or to the nursing home to see how these people are ending their life. No, the activities, like I said, putting the role model where they are still working in corporate America, they're still running a marathon, who wants to volunteer, who wants to continue offer more to the community, because that will be the reflect for you guys to feel that you can be doing more when your time will come to age. So, but if you start to focus and looking always the same mirror, the person who is always in pain, complaining, grumpy, so you're going to be one of those. But if you focus and look the positive way how much aging can give you, because aging not only give you that the many years of life, but also they give you the experience, the knowledge to come down when you need to be, the power to speak out, stop worrying about how you look, and my hair is like this, and my friend not like my teenage daughter, but start thinking about what I can offer to the community, what I can give it to them. So that is what I say, intergenerational activities are important at early ages. We were talking the other day, I would love to have a program where we can take the children and the youth and put it together to do fun activities, because that starts to be value their life.
We have a question coming in online that I think is interesting. The question is, how can we affirm the value and dignity of older adults by supporting them and contributing to them or to our communities? And I see Caitlin nodding her head. You want to take that?
Well, I just think it's an important perspective to account for, and it falls in line nicely with the idea of intergenerational, because I think our traditional thinking around intergenerational is how can we have a young person working with somebody from a different generation so that they can learn. And it's really, there's learning happening both directions. And I think being able to tap into people's purpose and what they contribute is really huge, and a huge opportunity that I think speaks to many ways that older adults can stay productive. And I think that recognition that people have this value, this thing that they bring to the table, regardless of whether it's from a professional experience, a personal experience, a cultural experience, the recognition of that, I think, is how we activate people's, respect and dignity, and sort of affirm them as humans, and not just think of them about their age. And I think that's true across the lifespan. I think as a young person who studies aging, I get the alternative a lot, actually, in terms of people sort of see me as a young person and they don't necessarily see my work, beyond that. So it's just sort of this idea that we can all be mistaken, or assumptions can be made about us based on our age. And so I think just recognizing that is a universal experience can be really powerful in terms of making people feel respected and empowered.
Mental health. A lot of people are talking about mental health and mental health crisis, and it begins at a young age. There's a real concern about the mental health crisis among the young. How can we better protect youth and their mental health for the future? Because that really, as we grow, as we get older. Ashwin, you want to tackle that one?
It's a big focus of ours in New York. We're obviously in the midst of a mental health crisis. We're seeing just unprecedented rates of teen depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, attempted suicides. We're seeing this also in a younger age cohort. The impact of digital media and social media is clear, if not complex, and needs more unpacking. So we are very much focused on youth mental health. And the other reality is that there's a very clear supply and demand mismatch. There's much more demand than we have supply of workforce and practitioners. So one of the approaches we've taken in New York is to really lean into technology. And we developed a public-private partnership with an online mental health platform called Talkspace to develop a bespoke version of that called New York City Teen Space, which is available to every teenager in New York City, over 440,000 teenagers 13 to 17, where they can sign up free of charge. All they need is a single parent consent, and within hours they're online with a therapist, a licensed therapist, a New York State licensed therapist who can provide them either synchronous or asynchronous chat or video therapy or referrals into crisis care or advanced care. And it's almost 6 months into it, and we've got more than 6,000 signups. What is very encouraging is that we're seeing most of those signups coming in low-income communities that really don't have access to care, mostly communities of color. We're seeing a lot of uptake on just the basics of anxiety and depression, but we're also seeing a lot of uptake on just navigating relational issues, not children, not young people with formal diagnoses or even at risk of formal diagnoses, but young people wanting the basics of how to interact. And why am I saying that? Because it isn't so much that this platform is a panacea for providing care. In democratizing access and digitizing access and putting it in this tool that young people now are native to and they've grown up with, what we're doing is normalizing the process of asking for help and then delivering when they ask for help. And those are life skills and tools that will last the entire lifespan. If, I've had family members struggle with mental illness, and in an immigrant family, very difficult, a lot of stigma. But one thing was true, no one felt comfortable asking for help.
Very true.
And imagine if we could normalize that so that in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, onto your older years, that you feel comfortable asking for help and knowing where to get it. So that's what we're trying to do in New York City.
Now jumping to an older, end of the cohort, particularly in the U.S., once you hit 65, people are looking to retire if they can afford it. However, unlike our grandparents, many of us, once you get into your 60s, 65, you might have 15 or 20 more years of life. And how can we ensure that people, once they get to 65, are still engaged in the economy and in contributing to society? Caitlin, you want to tackle that one?
I'll do my best. I think when it comes to workforce in particular, I think one of the things that we have seen in our work, especially in the Agefriendly Boston environment, similar to the Agefriendly New York work, is this idea of thinking about flexible environments for work. So this idea that the traditional into the office 9 to 5, Monday through Friday kind of situation it's not working for a lot of people right now, actually. But thinking about the older workforce and thinking about options for flexible, sort of transitional retirement, shorter hours, the ability to sit well at work, just very small things that can make employers be a little bit more age-friendly can allow people to stay in the workforce longer. And I think, you know, one point that's important to make is that once you're out of the workforce as an older person, it's much more difficult to re-enter the workforce because of ageism and technology and skills and all kinds of things. And so I think really trying to figure out how we can keep older workers in the workforce and all of those, the possible solutions there is something that we should be investing in. Yeah, and then I think, yeah, I'll stop there.
Marisol, why don't you take that about how you're investing in that, how you're doing that?
We at the moment at Alianza, we have more than 8 people who are 70 and older working with us. But like I totally said, we are adjustable to be flexible. But also we always encourage them to be more, so empower them. Because they start to get barriers and say, oh, I cannot do it. But when you push them a little bit, encourage and push a little bit, they can give the next step. Many of them bring a lot of knowledge from human resources, from financial to everything. But also, it's just give it the right tools. It's like bringing the tool or backpack full of tools. So many of those people don't know a lot about technology. So we teach about technology, but an appropriate way to teach, and age appropriate, we say. So we don't teach them like we do for a teenager, either for me, because last time I was trying to figure out how to use a cell phone and my daughter was telling me what to do. But so going, writing, putting, so they can remember later, bring the notes and figure out how to get what they need to do. Use the mouse, it's not easy, but we use tablets, making easier and friendly for them. Also, avoid some barriers like transportation. Boston is huge and New York is huge in public transportation. So why we don't know? We had a program with the MBTA where they come to the agency, take the group of senior or the older adults, we call it participants, not older because they don't like it. So the participants to navigate the whole system in Boston so they can go from point A to point B and around. And we partner with another organization where the organization bring our participants who want to continue in the workforce. They last about 1 year doing the training in the area we need it, and later they will be part of our group, our team. So it's like a steps, because what is the worst part of our participants to get in the workforce is the fear to make mistakes, to feel less than the younger generation. So we empower them and say, okay, you can do it, you can be okay. And everybody was, like I was telling my daughter, when you were learning to eat with the spoon, you didn't know how to do it, you made mistakes. It's the same thing happen. They're learning to use the technology. They can make mistakes. Why you get upset? We didn't get upset when you make a mess in the kitchen. So those are examples, but people forget about it. What was the growing up moment, right? So that is where we do it.
Good analogy, great. Andrew, you've written about from the economic shifts that need to happen to support longer lives. From an economist perspective, what needs to change?
Well, a lot. I mean, you know, in my book, I talk about the longevity imperative, which is that, you know, we can now expect the young and middle-aged to live a long life. For the first time ever in human history, the majority of young and middle-aged can expect to become not just old, but very old. But we fear that. We fear outliving our resources, our health. So how do you make that long life a good life? And that, of course, is what we've been talking about, because it's under-institutionalized. We don't have the means to support it. But economics is a key part of that. Of course, we need to have it a good and engaged life, but we need to create more resources. If we're living for longer, we have to create more resources to support that longer life. And I don't really think that's enough focus. What you're seeing, a lot of governments focus on pensions, and they say, well, if I just increase the age at which you can get a pension, then I solve a financial problem. But that doesn't really tackle the underlying problem, which is how can we remain productive? How do we keep our health, our skills, and how do we carry on working for longer? And just raising the state pension age does nothing to solve that particular problem. And you know, if you're an economist in development economics, you say, well, investing in health education amongst the young is good for the economy. But we just don't think about that at older ages. And I think we're beginning to wake up to the reality, at least in the UK, I can see it happening with the government, that when you have an aging population, health and skills amongst the older population is key for economic growth. And so I will zoom in particularly at that age 50 to 67, where people start to leave the labour market. And I think that's the area we really, really have to focus on. That's how we make our individual financial futures secure, being able to be productive for longer. Lots of things that requires. One is a shift towards preventative health, which I'm sure we'll talk about. We've got to keep people healthier for longer, particularly those at the lower end of the income distribution who tend to leave earlier from work because of ill health. But also we have to think about skills, and we talked about making jobs more age-friendly. There already have been. There's been a big increase in the number of age-friendly jobs. Work is becoming easier for older workers, but not in every sector. You know, if you're doing manual work, work has not become more age-friendly. So how do we help people in their labour market transitions go from perhaps doing something based around physical strength and skills to something where they've got the skills but they can shift to another occupation?
What about the clinical side? Ashwin, you want to take that? What can medical institutions do to support this?
I mean, I think we're not set up for this. We have a business model. We have a design problem in the way that we have set up our healthcare institutions. We spend about 17% of GDP on healthcare, $4.5 trillion, I think at last check. We spend about a third of that each on transportation, agriculture, and education. Just those three sectors. So more or less, we're spending 3 times as much on healthcare, which is catching a lot of downstream problems that could have been dealt with proportional greater investment in those other sectors, which are key for social determinants of health and key for prevention. And so we just have a kind of a flawed way of thinking about how to deliver on healthier, longer lives, in part because we have atomized that conversation down to the level of the individual. We have seemed to have forgotten our history of what got us 30 years of lifespan increase over the last 100 years, which was structural, policy, societal interventions grounded in public health and prevention, in the main. And we have to get back to some of that thinking. And so where are these kind of next level interventions? Well, we just need to structurally make healthier choices easier, whether it's through changes in our food system, shifting incentive structures within our insurance systems for more physical activity, healthier food choices. We may not be able to redress the economic balance between what we spend on healthcare and what we spend on prevention, but what we can do is take healthcare dollars and systematically drive them into communities. We're working on a big Medicaid waiver in New York State and New York City to do exactly that, to really drive Medicaid dollars into communities. We need much more of that, and you know, not to toot our own horn, we need to spend more on public health, not less. More on government public health, not less, at a time when, you know, Congress is talking about cutting the CDC and cutting the prevention fund. This is the wrong time to be thinking about that if we want to have healthier, longer lives.
Western cultures tend to have a negative view of aging. And what can we do to shift that mindset to promote a more positive outlook? What can we learn from other cultures? Andrew?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure you should ask economists about cultural issues. It's a tough one. I broadly agree Western cultures have a poor view on aging. I think that's for a bunch of reasons. One is that because of these gains to life expectancy, for most of human history, death has been spread across all ages, but now you're much more likely to die at an older age. So we now connect old age with death in a way that we didn't used to. And death is increasingly taboo. We also created retirement. We sort of said, people are economically inactive after a certain age. So we sort of devised a system that struggles to find a role for older people. In writing my book, I read Simone de Beauvoir's book on aging, which is the 1970s, and she's really angry about this. She says we've got to redesign life to make sure we have a role for people. So I think West does have a challenge. Japan is often held up as a place that has a good culture supporting older people, and I think that's broadly true. I think Japan achieves very good outcomes in terms of life expectancy because actually it tackles inequality pretty well, and I think that's a bigger challenge in the UK and the US, that we have huge disparities in ageing, which is a problem. But I also think we shouldn't sort of there's evidence that suggests that the more old people there are, the more negative you become about older people. And you're seeing this happen in Japan, for instance, that Japan have now developed this new word, which is the irritation caused in daily life by more older people being around. So I think we can sort of romanticize culture. And 200 years ago, if you look at literature in America, there's a lovely meta-analysis of your American books. When older people were mentioned, it was represented in terms of family, society, justice, civic duty. And now, because we've medicalized it, we talk about just dementia and adult diapers. So there's been a shift in culture. How do we change it? I think, again, I'll go back to, it's a very hard rewiring, but when the first time ever the young can expect to become the old, we've got to move away from talking an aging society and all these people aged over 65 and say, this is you. I was talking to a bunch of Chinese MBA students the other day, they're kind of early 30s, and I was showing them China's demographics with, in 35 years' time, there's all these people aged over 65. I said, how do you feel about this? They said, terrible. All these old people, they get ill, they're a problem. I said, who are these old people? They said, what do you mean? I said, well, in 35 years' time, who are all these people aged over 65? They said, well, they're old people. I said, no, it's you. And it was quite remarkable, the change in the conversation. It's like, oh, yeah, it's me. And I think that's what we've got to overcome. How do we see this as a process and not just say, suddenly you become old?
Marisol, your thoughts on that in the Latino community?
Yeah, I from Colombia, I'm Latina, 100%. We focus a lot about the value of the family, and family for us is not just the children and the parents, is the grandparents, uncles, cousins, neighbors, sometimes everybody who is coming there is our family. So we, since children, we start seeing how people is growing, so aging, we say, but we growing at the same time, others are growing too, or getting ill. So we value what they do because they are always involved in our life. They are giving us support, the grandparents take care of the children, the cooking, the cleaning, the helping, the growing in the garden. So we are always together. We are always seeing that it's something that we support each other as a family. That is what our value is, supporting each other. So when the person is aging, we give us support. So we feel like that will be our help for our example, for set it as an example for our children. Then later, when they grow, they will support us. So one of the things I say is also education. Education, the younger generation. That aging is something that's going to happen. It's a cycle of life. Everybody, at least something might happen, but everybody is going to get more years, more things, some issues, some no, but it depends how you take it, how you see it, how you prepare for that time. That will be easier or more difficult. So it depends how you are preparing everything. So you prepare it not only physical and mentally, but also financial, how you are preparing the goals and set it up goals for your age, for when you're getting a little older. The word is not nice, but when we're getting in there, set it up your goals, what you want to do, what you want to be, where you want to be. But people forgot about it. People forgot about it. Oh, that 20 years old, 25, having fun, going to the night class, but I'm not going to get there never. But when you realize it's like this, you are in the 60s, you didn't prepare for that. Yeah.
We're running out of time, and I want to make sure we get to everyone and all of the questions. But life expectancy is increasing, but not for all ethnicities and socioeconomic groups. How can we ensure that everyone has the opportunity to live a long and healthy life? And I know, Ashwin, you wanted to talk about that briefly.
I'm so glad we're sort of ending in this vein, because I think inequity is a real missing piece in the dialogue, the public narrative around longevity and aging. It isn't experienced equally. And I felt a little bad coming to an event on longevity, because you'll never hear me use the word longevity. I always use life expectancy. Why? Because it's about expectation, but not just individual expectation, but what must you expect from society and from government? What must you expect from policy? What should your leaders be delivering for you? How do we create a civic expectation that healthier, longer lives, more equitably experienced, are actually a part of how we judge our society? And you said life expectancy is increasing. It's not in America, right? We've had a decade of flatlining, and then we went through COVID and the insult of COVID. And yes, we're gaining a little bit back, but we're way below where we were in 2019. We saw the same phenomenon in New York City, and we saw profound inequities there. So we created Healthy NYC, our population health agenda, to get to our highest life expectancy ever by 2030. And it's very clear that there is no path to get there without addressing premature death below age 65. Who's dying below age 65? It's consistently Black and brown communities in New York City, and many urban centers, and frankly the country looks awfully like that. And so what we are trying to say in lifting that up is that these are not mutually exclusive agendas, that in fact the equity agenda is central to the life expectancy agenda, that there is no path that doesn't go through equity and address the causes of premature death to get us to healthier, longer lives for everybody. It lifts all boats.
We just have a few minutes left, and we want to do a quick lightning round so everybody gets final thoughts. Please answer in less than a minute if you can. What advice would you give to young people now looking to improve their longevity or the rest of their lives?
Well, I feel like others will have better advice than me.
Well, I'll start, which is enjoy any age that you're at, because aging is a privilege afforded to not everyone.
Yeah.
So whatever age you are, find the positive in it, because it's gone soon.
The irony of talking about longer lives is we always run out of time, isn't it? So I just, I think that's great advice. You've got to make a friend of your future self, because your future now extends much further. And what is it that's going to make it your life? And I think that's the key.
I would say be prepared. Start preparing for what you expect to be in that time. So prepare your physical, mental, financial, and also never stop learning, because who stop learning will step back. So
I think you need to take a crack at that.
Mine's actually simpler. It's spend less time on screens and more time in real life, forming community, building the relationships that will last you the rest of your life, because that will be sustenance for a healthy, longer life.
There was one thought in your book, Andrew, that I thought was really interesting, and we have a minute left to address it. And there was a quote about, and I think we talked about it right before, about ageism is really, discrimination against your future self. I think that's a nice way to wrap up. Can you just talk for a minute about that?
No, I mean, prejudice is normally of the other. So the bizarre thing about ageism is there's a prejudice against your future self. And in a world where the young rarely became the old, perhaps that was excusable, but in a world where the young can expect to become the old, I think it's going to be a really big problem. And it goes right back to, if you underestimate the capacity of older people and your later years, and you are likely to become old, that's a big problem in your life planning.
Anybody else want to jump on that one? Thank you. We're quickly coming to the end here. Thank you all so much for being here today and for the very thoughtful conversations. I really learned a lot. It's very eye-opening. If you missed any part of this conversation or any part of this program, you can watch the recording on Harvard Chan's YouTube page. And thank you all very much for being here. Have a great afternoon.